Sometimes I tell myself that if I had known what was waiting for me in April 2014, I would have begged the sun not to rise that morning. The pain that stepped into my life that day still sits in my chest like a shadow that refuses to leave. What I survived is something I never believed could happen to a human being, especially not to someone like me, a quiet girl of 23 who only wanted a simple life. Before I begin, please tell me where you are watching from, so we can grow this family together and keep praying for one another. Your presence means more than you know. My name is Amira Zara, and I grew up believing that silence kept a woman safe. In the palace where I lived, people walked with their heads down, their steps careful, their words light like feathers. I was married into the royal household, and even though the walls were made of marble and gold, they felt colder than winter itself. The prince, Khalid, the man I was given to, was respected by everyone. People either bowed because they honored him or because they feared him. I never knew which group I belonged to. Everything changed the morning. One of the palace women walked into my room with a stiff face. She stood in front of me and revealed that the royal physicians had examined me and believed I was infertile. She said it in a calm way, but those words beat against my ears like heavy stones. I remember holding my stomach as if a hole had opened inside me. I was 23. And suddenly my whole existence was judged by a wound that refused to speak. Not long after that, the king's advisors arrived in my section of the palace. They didn't shout, but their eyes carried something sharper than any blade. One of them explained that women in my position were expected to give heirs, and if they failed, the punishment could be severe. He mentioned that the law allowed purification by fire for women who were considered useless to the royal line. I felt my knees grow weak. The floor under my feet felt like sand that wanted to swallow me. When Prince Khalid entered my room later, he wasn't the same man who used to avoid looking directly at me. His hands were shaking. His face was pale. He stood there like someone trapped in a cage with no door. He didn't use harsh words, but he revealed that his father had ordered him to set me on fire publicly as a sign of loyalty to the royal family. He said they believed my infertility made me a threat to the honor of the house. Hearing that from the man who shared my home made something inside me crack slowly like dry wood. The next few days were like walking through a nightmare while fully awake. Every whisper in the palace seemed to be about me. Everywhere I walked, people stared at me, the way someone stares at an object that is already considered dead. My meals were smaller. My doors were locked earlier. Even the servants who used to smile at me began to step away when I passed. The loneliness cut deeper than any knife ever could. One night, the head servant came to my room. She kept glancing behind her as if the shadows could report her. She leaned close and told me the execution would happen soon. She explained that the prince had argued, cried, begged, and even refused, but the king reminded him that disobedience meant losing everything, including his own life. She said the prince broke down and admitted he had no choice. When she left, I sat on my cold floor and tried to breathe. My heart felt heavy like it carried 1,000 stones. I wasn't afraid of death as much as I was afraid of dying without meaning. I didn't know whether to scream, run, or beg. I felt trapped between walls that had already decided my fate long before I understood my place in that world. The day they took me out of my room, I saw the sky. It was bright. Painfully bright, as if the sun was unaware of the darkness happening below it. Guards led me through the courtyard. The air smelled like oil and smoke. People gathered silently, their faces unreadable. Some looked away, some watched closely, and some seemed eager to see what they felt was justice. And standing in the center was Prince Khalid. His hands were trembling so much that even the fire in the torch he held seemed scared to burn. When his eyes met mine, I saw a man torn apart on the inside. He didn't want this. He didn't choose this. He was just a prisoner wearing royal clothes. As I walked toward him, the fear in my chest rose like a flood. My legs felt weak and tears slid down my face even when I tried to hide them. Every step I took felt like moving closer to the end of my story. The guards held my arms, but the real chains were the rules of a world that valued honor more than human life. Inside me, something whispered that this was not where my story would end. But I didn't understand how or why. Not yet. What happened next would break every law, every expectation, and every boundary between life and death. And it would change both of us forever. When the guards dragged me into the courtyard, the cold air touched my skin in a way that made me shiver, even though the sun was out. I remember looking around and seeing people standing in a circle, silent and waiting. Some had faces filled with fear, some looked curious, and some looked like they had already judged me in their hearts. It felt like I was no longer human to them. I felt like I was just a story they wanted to watch end. I kept telling myself to be strong, but my legs were weak. My chest felt tight, and my heartbeat was loud in my ears. The guards held my arms, as if I might try to run, even though I had nowhere to go. The truth was simple. I was a 23-year-old woman, accused of being infertile, and in that palace, infertility was treated like a crime against honor. When I saw Prince Khalid standing in the center of the courtyard, everything inside me shook. His face was so pale that he looked almost sick. He held a burning torch, but his hands were trembling so much that the flame kept shaking. I saw his fear. I saw his guilt. I saw the weight of the order he had been forced to obey. He wasn't just holding fire. He was holding a command that could destroy us both. He looked at me with eyes full of pain, and even though he said nothing, I could feel the storm inside him. It was like he wanted to run toward me and at the same time run away from everything around him. I could see that he had not slept. His eyes were red, and his shoulders were bent as if the whole world had pressed down on him. He had revealed earlier that refusing the king's order would cost him his own life. So he was trapped, just like me. As they pushed me forward, I could feel the ground under my feet turning rough. Dust rose with each step I took. The smell of oil from the wood they prepared for me filled the air. It felt like my lungs were tightening. My whole body began to shake. I felt so small, so helpless, so lost. Even though there were many people around me, I felt alone in a way I never had before. The guards positioned me beside a pile of wood already soaked with oil. My hands were tied, and the rope cut into my skin. I remember looking up at the sky and wondering if God saw me. I wondered if my life mattered to anyone beyond the people who wanted me burned. I wondered if hope could still exist in a place filled with fear. People in the crowd began whispering among themselves. I could feel their eyes traveling across my body as if I was already gone. Some of them watched with cold interest, as if they were waiting for a show. Others looked scared, probably thinking about how easily they too could be accused one day. A few looked away, unable to meet my eyes. But none stepped forward, none spoke for me, none asked for mercy. Prince Khalid walked closer, and I could see sweat on his forehead even though the air was cool. He looked at me with a kind of brokenness that made my heart ache. It was like he wanted to tell me he was sorry, but he knew sorry would not save me. He held the torch carefully, but the flame still flickered wildly. I saw his fingers shake, and for a moment I wondered if he would drop the torch before anything happened. One of the king's advisors stepped forward and nodded at him. Khalid froze. His chest rose and fell quickly, as if he couldn't breathe. He didn't speak, but his eyes told me he was begging for a miracle that might stop what was about to happen. The advisor repeated the order with a cold stare. I felt the fear inside me rise higher than before. It felt like standing in the middle of a storm with no shelter. Khalid walked toward the wood. Each step he took looked heavy, like his legs didn't want to move. I saw the pain on his face, the confusion, the helplessness. He was a prince, but in that moment, he was no different from me, a prisoner of rules that cared nothing for human life. As he lifted the torch, my whole world slowed down. I could feel my heartbeat pounding. My mind was begging for rescue, but my body felt frozen. I could smell the oil on the wood. I could feel the heat from the torch even before it touched the firewood. My eyes filled with tears. A sharp pain moved from my chest to my throat. Everything inside me screamed. And then, for the first time in my life, I felt death standing close to me. But what I did not know, what none of us knew, was that the moment he tried to drop that torch would be the moment heaven itself stepped into our story. Everything that happened next broke every expectation, every tradition, and every rule of that kingdom. And it changed my life forever. When Prince Khalid lifted the torch, my chest tightened so much that it hurt to breathe. The firelight danced on the wood beside me, and even though the flame hadn't touched it yet, I could already feel heat on my skin. The air around me changed. It became heavy, almost thick, like even the wind was afraid to move. My knees shook, my hands felt numb, and fear ran through my body like a river that had no end. I kept telling myself to stay calm, but my heart didn't listen. The guards stood close behind me. Their faces were blank, but their eyes told me that they believed this was the only path for someone like me. The women in the crowd shifted uneasily, some covering their mouths, others turning away because they couldn't watch. I saw one woman look at me with pity, but her fear kept her still. No one moved to help. No one dared. Prince Khalid took another step toward the wood, and in that moment I realized something painful. He was suffering too. His hands were trembling so violently that the flame on the torch kept flickering. His eyes were red, and tears were forming, even though he tried to hide them. He was a prince, but right then, he looked like a boy trapped inside a nightmare he could not escape. He had once revealed to me that the punishment for disobeying his father was death, and I knew that he was standing there not as my enemy, but as another victim. When he came close enough for me to feel the heat of the torch, the crowd grew silent. It was the kind of silence that squeezes your heart. The kind of silence that only happens when something terrible is about to take place. I lowered my head because I could not bear to see the fire touch the wood meant for my body. My fear became so strong that it felt like my whole life flashed before my eyes. My childhood, my mother's hands, my first day in the palace, the day I learned I was infertile, the moment the accusation was announced. Everything played in my mind like a storm. Then suddenly, everything changed. Just when Prince Khalid tried to drop the torch onto the wood, a strong wind swept through the courtyard. It came out of nowhere. It was cold, powerful, and filled with something I still cannot explain. The torchlight bent, almost as if the flame bowed to the wind. People gasped. The guards stepped back. The fire flickered wildly until it went out completely in his hand. Khalid froze. He looked at the torch, then at me, then at the sky. His mouth opened slightly, but he couldn't speak. It was like the whole courtyard had been shaken by something greater than all of us. Before anyone could understand what was happening, the very ground beneath us seemed to vibrate lightly. It was soft at first, then stronger, as if a step had been taken, but not by a human. The sunlight became brighter around me, almost like a warm circle had formed on the ground. I felt the air shift. I felt something gentle touch my skin, something that did not come from the wind or the people watching. I knew in my heart that someone had stepped into that moment. The guards looked around in confusion. One of them dropped his spear. Another took a step back as if an invisible force had pushed him. Prince Khalid's eyes widened and his face changed from fear to awe. He didn't say anything, but the expression alone told me that he saw something I couldn't yet understand. His whole body began trembling, not from fear this time, but from something sacred. Then it happened. The ropes around my wrists loosened. On their own. They slipped off like soft cloth instead of the rough fiber that had been cutting into my skin. I looked down at my hands, shocked. The guards panicked. One of them shouted for others to step forward, but before they could move, they stumbled, as if something unseen was holding them back. I felt warmth behind me, soft, peaceful, powerful. The kind of warmth that makes you cry without knowing why. A presence stood close, but I could not turn around. My body felt frozen, yet safe, completely safe. Prince Khalid stepped back slowly, staring at something behind me with trembling lips. He looked like someone who had seen a miracle unfold right in front of him. He didn't speak, but I saw tears fall down his face. My heart began to race. My legs shook. I wanted to turn around, but I felt too overwhelmed. The warmth grew stronger, covering me like a shield. The pain in my chest softened. The fear in my mind faded. The air became gentle and full of peace. In that moment, even without seeing, I knew. Jesus had stepped into that courtyard, not in anger, not in noise, not in a storm that destroys, but in a quiet, powerful presence that made the fire die, the ropes fall, the guards tremble, and the prince dropped to his knees. Everyone stood frozen. Everyone felt it. Everyone knew something beyond human control had entered that place. I felt my breath return. I felt the strength in my legs again. I felt the fear leave my body like it had been washed away. And deep inside me I understood. My life was not ending here. This was the moment everything changed. This was the moment heaven said no to the plans of men. And it was only the beginning of what would happen next. When the warmth around me faded slowly, I found myself standing free. The ropes had fallen to the ground like old leaves. My hands were no longer shaking. My heart, which had felt like it was drowning only minutes earlier, was now steady. I took a slow breath, and it felt like the first real breath of my entire life. The courtyard was silent, so silent that I could hear the soft rustle of the wind. Everyone was staring at me with wide eyes. Some looked terrified, others confused, and many looked like they had witnessed something too holy for their minds to understand. Even the guards who were supposed to hold me down were frozen, their spears hanging loosely in their hands. Prince Khalid knelt on the ground, his face wet with tears he could not hide. He kept staring at the space behind me, the same place where I had felt that powerful warmth. He didn't need to say anything. His body told me that he knew exactly what had happened. He understood that the one who stepped into that moment was greater than any king, greater than any law, greater than any fear. I walked toward him slowly. The crowd stepped back as if they were watching something sacred unfold. The prince lifted his head when I reached him, and even without speaking, I could see the shame and pain in his eyes. He had been forced to choose between his own life and mine, and the weight of that decision had crushed his heart. But now, something new was growing inside him, something softer, something truer. He lowered his head, not because he feared me, but because he feared the presence that had saved me. He seemed overwhelmed, like someone who had seen the truth for the first time. Suddenly, the king's advisors rushed forward, shouting and pointing, trying to regain control of the courtyard. Their faces were twisted with anger and confusion. They didn't understand what had happened, and they didn't like losing power. One of them tried to grab my arm again, but before his hand could touch me, he stumbled backward as if pushed by an invisible force. His face went pale. Fear gripped him like a shadow. The rest of the guards dropped their weapons. Some fled, some fell to their knees, and some covered their faces. No one dared to touch me again. Prince Khalid stood slowly and faced his father's advisors. He didn't shout or argue. He simply spoke with a calmness I had never seen in him. He revealed that he would no longer obey the order to kill me, because he had just witnessed something that had changed him forever. He said that whatever strength had saved me was not from this world, and he refused to fight against it. The advisors were furious, but they were also terrified. They kept looking around the courtyard, as if expecting the invisible presence to appear again. Their fear silenced them more than any argument could. Before long, the courtyard emptied. People whispered among themselves, too shocked to stay. Some bowed their heads, some fled, and some stood trembling, unsure of what they had witnessed. I saw tears in the eyes of servants, guards, and even strangers who had come to watch my punishment. Many looked like the miracle had reached into their hearts and shaken something deeply inside them. Prince Khalid walked beside me as we left the courtyard. The sun touched my skin gently, no longer burning, no longer frightening. I felt like someone who had crossed through death and come back alive. And as we walked through the quiet palace corridors, the prince revealed that he believed his entire life had been built on fear and rules. And now he was ready to choose a new path, one that honored the presence we had both felt. We left the palace that night. Not with guards, not with fear, not as prisoners, but as people who had been set free by a power greater than any earthly kingdom. For the first time I felt peace deep inside me. A peace that didn't come from safety or comfort, but from knowing that heaven had stepped into my suffering and refused to let it destroy me. I realized then that my story was no longer about pain, it was about purpose. No longer about death, it was about life. No longer about shame, it was about the love that rescued me. And even though the world outside the palace was still full of danger, I knew I would never walk alone again. A word to every Christian reading this. My story may be fictional, but the suffering it represents is real. There are believers all over the world facing persecution, torture, rejection, and death every single day because of their faith in Jesus. Some are hiding, some are running, and some are crying out for strength. Please, wherever you are right now, take a moment to pray for them. Pray for courage, for protection, for hope, and for strength that only God can give. And if you are reading this and you feel far from God, or you want to start your journey with Him, here is a simple prayer. Lord Jesus, I come to you today. I believe you love me. I ask you to forgive my sins and come into my heart. Make me your own. Give me a new life and help me follow you. Amen. If you prayed that from your heart, your journey of faith begins today. You are not alone. Heaven is with you.